What did you do?
The white paper. He wanted to know if he should get the white paper. That was very funny. Oh, oh, I need a good laugh every now and then. That is really funny. All right, I'm going to talk about Oscar. Oscar and I, we had our little tiffs and our little arguments, but we really were crazy about each other. One time, Oscar almost passed out in the office. He had a lozenge stuck in his throat and he couldn't breathe. I had to call the doctor next door and they took him to the hospital and whatnot. And this is what I got the message from. The nurse came out to tell me that my husband said, tell my wife that I love her very much in case I don't come through this. So that was a message that I got. So it was a love affair. Even though at times I say we had our differences and we battle and everything, but it was like a postgraduate course, as I said. He knew so much, and it being a little older than myself, naturally, he had a little more experience and so on. He imparted his knowledge to me. We used to have an argument sometimes, and I'd say to him, well, we're never going to solve this because there's a generation difference. And that would make him laugh, and that would take care of that, you know. So that was that. You know, we did things together, worked in the office and helped him. I was a big help to him because he was not cared very much about money. I mean, he liked poetry. Well, I'll show you all his poetry books. Everything is underlined. I'll have to show you that before you leave. And he, of course, liked music. And every Sunday morning I would be awakened with one of the symphonies, Horowitz playing I forget which symphony now, but let's see, a very beautiful one anyhow. Yeah, it was Rachmaninoff. He'd wake me up with Rachmaninoff every Sunday morning. And he was the one that really bought records and books. I mean, I didn't like to spend the money, but he did. I mean, look at all the books we have in our house. He must have spent thousands on books and records through the years. And that was really, you might say, his hobby. So, and it was just, you know, it was a nice home, musical home with violins and with people coming in with music, piano, and always, you know, that kind of thing. It was
like when you played together.
Oh yeah, once a couple of times we played together. I wasn't the greatest pianist, but if I made a mistake, he'd hit me over the head with the bow. So I think I got a little discouraged about playing the piano with him. And he was a very good doctor.
That must have been what the teachers in those days did.
They must have done. Well, he was a teacher for a while. You know, I don't know whether you know it. First of all, I don't know whether you realize that he went to one of the finest high schools, Stuyvesant High School. You had to be a very good student to go to Stuyvesant. And it's still, I think, to this day is one of those outstanding. I think at one time it was an all-boys high school. I'm not sure what it is now. But he went to that school. And then, you know, when he was admitted to medical college, very, very few Jewish boys were admitted to medical schools in those days. And he made it, and he was, you know, he must have been a fairly good student because he was a very, very good doctor. One thing about it, he had back problems, so I always used to tease him. I said, well, all the nurses, with all the nurses, and you were so good looking, no wonder you had back problems. So, you know, he always laughed about that. But he knew his stuff, and if he didn't, he always called a consultant in, and he didn't think he played God, you know. So he was really good that way. People liked him very much. He didn't, when he was in public, he was, you know, on the quiet side. But when he had something to say, it was always something profound. I mean, whether it was political or history or whatever, he was well liked. Now the family of Rose Silver and them, they really, they doted on everything he said. And then they formed an alliance where he was the doctor that they used in all of their cases. They sent the cases up to him to examine. Legal cases, yeah. And I learned to write those reports, and it was a pretty good team, and we worked as a very good team. I really preferred being in the office to doing teaching, which I did substitute teaching for a couple of years, but then I handled the office. I did everything that had to do, but I had one very bad experience that I have to tell you about. He would examine people for insurance, and every one of those insurance papers meant $15 in your pocket. And then so what he would do, he would take all the information that he wanted, write it on a separate piece of paper, attach it to the insurance form that had to be filled out for the company, and put them in a folder which I had arranged for him. And then on Sundays, after he would go to the hospital, make his rounds, he'd come back and sit here at this table here and fill out those things. And then in the morning, I would take it, because I would go to the hospital. We had two cars. I would go to the office, and he would go to make his rounds. See, so I would leave for the hospital for the rounds, and he would go to the hospital. So this one time, I guess I get down to the office, and I'm ready to take those papers to get ready. I don't have them. How could I not have them? So I call the house, and he says, they're not around here. I said, oh, maybe they're in the back of the car, and I didn't realize it because I realized something must have happened. So I start driving back, and I had a big clip on the papers. And as I'm riding back, I see this clip on the road. And right alongside, there was a lot, and I'll show it to you where the lumber company is. There was a wrought iron fence, a picket with the sticking kind of a fence. And I see these papers all over the fence and all over the lot. And what happened was, I probably couldn't open the door of the car. I must have put the thing on the top of the car to open the door, got into the car, forgot to take them down. And here I am. If I hadn't seen that clip, I wouldn't have realized. So just as luck would have it, and I really must have looked terribly perplexed and worried. So, because after all, I was offending insurance people. These people were putting money in our pocket, and I was sending you guys through medical school. And this young man comes by in a Volkswagen. I mean, God bless him. And he stops the car, and he comes over, he says, are you having a problem? And I tell him. He jumps over that fence, picks up every single piece of paper that you can imagine, puts them in the car. I get down to the office and put everything together. Not one piece of paper was missing. That was, I think, a miracle of all kinds of miracles, So that took care of that. Dad had he didn't put up with carelessness, let's put it that way, because he really wasn't like that. I mean, he did things very methodically, and he, couldn't see that kind of thing. So, of course, he felt better when I said that everything was taken care of and so on. So that was good. He also had a lot of different experiences in the office, and people really cared about him. But, he had this one thing. He did deliver babies, very interesting. By the end of his practice, he had already delivered 2 people, babies. They were the ones he delivered to begin with. Now he was delivering their babies to them. So that was quite a very, very exciting time. There were a few of them like that. They were Latin American people, and they were very, very nice. And they really loved him a lot. So, and he had, a very nice following. People who, every doctor has people who like them and don't like them. That's normal. But for the most part, everybody really cared about him. Of course, did I ever read you, or you must have read the letter that this one patient of his wrote
I don't know.
about him? It was read at the funeral. It was such a eulogy. I don't know. I must have the box of letters here someplace. I think in the storage room. It was a eulogy, and so when that letter was read, one of the doctors in town called me, and he said, Florence, he said, can I borrow that letter? And I said, sure. He said, well, he said, I'm going to publish it in the St. Joseph's Hospital newsletter. He says, because it was such a tribute to Oscar, you know. And there was a group of doctors who were GPs here, and they formed their own little group, GPs, and we used to have different meetings. So they'd be at different people's homes. So I had them here one night, and I don't know, I served certain foods, and oh, they thought it was just about the greatest thing in the world. And we had, so when Oscar got sick like that, they'd all drop in on him. And this one doctor particularly, he had a son who was married to a Jewish girl. He was very, very Catholic. And so he would really stop in on Oscar all the time. And he'd say, come on, Oscar, get out of bed, will you? He had a sense of humor. We miss you. Get up. Come on, get going. We need you, so on and so forth. And so he was really very well thought of. Everybody knew that he loved clothes. His shoes, his clothes, he was meticulous and always, huh? Ties, everything. I mean, he was meticulous. Everybody knew that in the hospital. The other doctors would be looking to see what Oscar was wearing today, because he carried clothes nicely. And also, when he walked into a room, he was really outstanding. He was tall, he was handsome, he made an appearance, he was someone to be proud of. I was really very proud to be his wife because, I basically, as a younger girl, I think I had an inferiority complex, I must say so. I don't know why I had it, but I always felt that I could be better. I could do better, And I think by marrying Oscar and being a doctor's wife, people gave me a lot of respect also. And that buoyed up my feelings and changed me a lot too, and gave me more confidence to do things and finally become what I really eventually became. I have to talk about that and admit that that's the way it was. So, so that was.
Tell us about his illnesses and
Well,
his practice.
yeah, well, I'll tell you about his illnesses. He always complained about his back. I mean, from when I can remember, when I first met him was in Sharon Springs, and he was as handsome as the day is long there. Two of the girls all flocked around him. They had these girls came out and they just danced around him all the time and everything. And I wanted to make him jealous because I wanted to, I didn't go out to do it. I mean, I danced with the other guys up there and don't forget I was a counselor up there, so I was busy with the kids too. So, so anyhow, he was popular because he was the doctor, and so. And then his mother came up one of the times, and and I talked to her and everything, as I think I mentioned before. I didn't meet the blueprint, but eventually, what happened through the years, my mother-in-law wound up staying at my house, and it worked out that way. And we got, after a while, very long and very well, and so on. His illnesses, when he had an ulcer. Most of his life, he complained about ulcers, but he never stopped smoking, And I'm trying to think of one time I had to call Dr. Foti, who came in from New York because he was sick. He liked Dr. Foti. He was someone he knew from Foti was sort of a Romanian foreign type doctor. Does anybody remember Foti at all? So, no, you wouldn't, because I was pregnant at the time. And Oscar was not feeling well. I think he had pneumonia then. So Fody came up and took care of him, and then they pulled through pretty well. And then he always complained mainly about his back, but he was a hard worker. I mean, he made house calls and night calls and day calls. And I remember during the winter time in the snow, when we lived on Ocean Parkway, he couldn't drive a car because of the streets were all full of snow, not cleared. And he would put galoshes on and trudge through the snow to go make a house call, that kind of thing, you know. And I would feel guilty. So I would get up and sit in the chair until he came back, even though I had no reason. I could have slept, but I always felt that way. Also, I have to tell you, this is funny that I should be talking about it. But when the phone would ring during certain periods of the night, I would jump like crazy. We'd have phone calls coming through, you know. I always felt like someone was looking in to see what we were doing, with the phone calls. And you had these calls. You don't know what it's like to be a doctor and have those kind of calls. One of the times, this was before we were married, and this is strange, I had a funny dream. We were going steady already. We were going to get married. I dreamt that he was driving the car and he came to a cliff, and he almost just got to the end of the cliff when the car stopped. Now that's a peculiar dream. So I mentioned it, and guess what? That very night, he had been called to a house, and he lived in the Bronx, to make a house call. But when he got there wasn't anybody sick there. There was a burglar with a gun that probably wanted drugs. He put the gun to him, put him down the basement, and made him take his ring off. He had a beautiful ruby ring. And then Oscar said, look, I'll give you money, I'll give you anything you want, just don't use the gun. Put the gun away. So that was an episode, and it was a very frightening episode in his life as a doctor who made a house call. See, but isn't it funny that I had that dream just that night? It was really a very strange thing, and that's what happened there. So then we moved to Sparkill. We got married, we lived in the Bronx, and he never liked living in, it was very uncomfortable with the folks and everything. So he wanted to start a new practice. It was always very difficult to start practices in those days. You didn't make a living so easily, It isn't like today. There are Medicares and have all the things that take care of you right off the bat. So we decided, he was looking around, we found this place in Sparkill. Sparkill was near Nyack, New York. And was a two-family house, which the office could be downstairs and we could live upstairs. And there was a pharmacist. It was a Jewish man who was a pharmacist in Sparkill. And it was a very small community, and it seemed like it would be a nice place to live. So we moved in there. One day the phone rings, and it's the telephone operator. She says, good morning. I said, good morning. She says, oh, I know you're up because your shades went up. So I knew what we were in for. And we were being watched very, very closely, that kind of community. And it was not much it wasn't a good practice. It was a few patients. There weren't that many to draw from, actually. And then one time he gets called to there was it was like a little country place too, with outlying little farms or houses or whatnot, and he gets called to somebody who neglected to call at the right time, and he gets there, and it's a child who had died for appendicitis, and that upset him very much. He was very upset with that. So we lived there for about a year, and I mean, he'd go into the city like on a Saturday, and I'd be left alone, and I really didn't like it. There was nothing there for me at all. And Nyack was the biggest city that was nearby, so if I needed meat or anything, right, so I had to call Nyack. The butcher would send it down on the bus that was coming through Sparkill, and that's the way I got stuff like that. There was a little grocery store that you could get some things, but it certainly wasn't the kind of a place for a city slicker to live, you know. And as I say, I was young. I was only, what, 21 years old. And all those things, you know. And I graduated from college, by the way, at the age of 19. I was one of the youngest girl graduates that you can imagine.
What
So,
about his illnesses here, you know, his last illness?
well, that started with, for years, he'd been complaining about, and he never told me that when he would expectorate blood. And then finally, you know, I found it on his handkerchiefs, and I started to question it. So he made light of it, but then he went and he had x-rays. And they found a spot. So he took the x-ray to, I remember, Dr. Ehrman and two other doctors, and they didn't make too much of it, but they decided to do a bronchoscope. They never could find anything. So this went on for years. He was expectorating blood, couldn't find anything, complaining about his ulcers, complaining about dogs, complaining about his back. Then, what's his name? One of the doctors, chest man, O'Hare, said that there was a new instrument down at the medical center, and he wanted to do a bronchoscopy with that new instrument, and that's when they found it. It was so deeply embedded that it never showed up on really on a normal x-ray or a normal thing, and we didn't have the MRIs yet. See, maybe then it would have shown up. Maybe that's what he took. I don't know. They did a bronchoscopy. He must have had 10 bronchoscopies through the years. So that's when it started. So then he decided to operate. Okay? So he had a staff. It was a 4 doctors, 5 doctors. They operated on him. And then they said, they operated in 74. And I think he died in 79. And they said that they thought they got 99% out of it, they said, and he went through hell. That was some operation. He didn't sleep in the bed. He slept on that green chair. I had padded it with pillows. I had a big pillow, and I padded it and did everything to make him comfortable because he couldn't lie down properly in the bed. And so he, you know, slept there, and it was very painful. But the way they cut it, that from here went all the way around, like he had a cut like that. And, you know, he had the pain medicine and everything. And I remember before the operation, he had no appetite. He couldn't eat. We tried to get him to eat, you know. And the Silvers would come up. They brought him things that were appetizing, lox and whitefish and sturgeon, you know, to make him eat and so on. And so that's what he went through. He really went through a very hard time. But then after that, O'Hare said, look, Oscar, we want you to go back to practice. You can't sit here and worry about the next 4 years because you'll do pretty well. So he did. Up until the time, we went on a vacation and we came back from, where were we coming from? We used to go by ourselves, naturally. You weren't around. I think it was San Diego. We went to San Diego, stayed at a hotel there. And we liked going to San Diego. We went a few times. And we get off the plane and he says he doesn't feel well. So we get home, and I called Dr. Marcus, who was his doctor at the time, who was the one he covered for, back and forth. And Dr. Marcus checked him out, and he had temperature and everything, and decided that he better get back into the hospital because, no, then he started to fall. That's when it started. He started to fall, and I couldn't pick him up. I remember sitting in the kitchen, and he wanted a glass of water, and I went to get him the water, and he fell on the floor in the kitchen. So at that time, and you asked me who was important in my life, and now that you're asking me, I'm telling you, it was the Israelis, Ruth and Sammy. Sammy had come here as a student at the university, and in economics, and I don't know, agricultural economics. as an exchange through Israel, and she was a nurse. So she and he came to get their green card at the office. That time he was feeling well. Well, it was the in between, the what do you call that when they have the with the R, the remission. See, so after the operation it was 4 years. So they came to the office and we became quite friendly with them. And Ruthie was a very good nurse, and Sammy, well, we were friends, they'd come by. And so when he got sick like that and had to get back into bed again, so Ruthie had to study for her state exam here, and she would study in the house here so she could help me pick him up when it was necessary. And then Sammy would come also, and so on. And I had him here for a while, and he was really quite sick in the house, and finally it got worse, and he, had to go to the hospital. And Richard, I have written you a note. It's in that green box. And that note says that you were really something. You came out 2 weekends from New York when he was in the hospital, and that's really something. I mean, it wasn't like it was around the corner. You came too, but you were closer. I mean, he was so far away, and he comes, and I remember him telling the nurse how she should handle him, how to lift his legs in the bed and so on. So I wrote you a note for posterity. I wrote you a note for posterity also in the green box about your kindnesses and so on and so forth. So that was my experience with
It'll
him.
have to be revised, I'm sure, because
I don't think so.
And you're still going to take us out to dinner tonight.
I am taking the credit card with me. I'm taking the credit card with me. But no, I just really want to say that I think that there were so many things in my life with the music that maybe if I'd have married someone else, I'd never have had that enjoyment of his playing the violin and the music and the things that we had, even with the family in New York, even with the all the, don't you remember all the music? You people must remember it. And things like that. And we made friends with the Gladstones. And she was a Juilliard pianist, And remember at my party, she got up to say that when she met us was one of the best things that ever happened to her, particularly because her husband and Oscar were linguists with words, with whatnot, and with Oscar with the music, with the violin and the piano. They used to let their hair down, and we just had a lot of good times that way. Oscar always ready to pick up his violin. Oh, go back to our 25th wedding anniversary. I had 2 parties. By that time, I had made 2 sets of friends. And I don't think either one of you were here for that occasion. You were away at schools and you couldn't possibly get here. So we had made 2 sets of friends. And I had one party at the house and one party at a hotel. And we had hired a band, and I had Oscar with the violin. He played with the band. He always had to get in with the band and play. And he was a very good by ear player. I mean, he could pick anything up. Not everybody can do that. But he and Henry, when they got together, boy, it was fabulous. They really could work it. They really had a lot of culture, a lot of Oscar. I mean, he loved music to the greatest extent that I could imagine. And of course, I mean, I had a little of it in me, but I got all of that from him. I mean, being married to him such a long time, it was 42 years. So you learned a lot of things that way. And as I say, we had a very good time. So I say I was very honored to be his wife, and people respected me. But I was never anything else except Oscar's wife, Kenneth's mother, and Richard's mother. Wherever I went, if I put out a credit card, they say, "Oh, are you Richard's mother?" Because of his basketball. If I put out a card, anybody had to do with your type of thing, with going to medical school or whatever, they'd say, "Oh, you're Kenneth Koenig's mother." So I was always someone's mother or someone's wife. So that was all through the years. I have to tell one story that you probably forgot, Kenneth, when you were in medical school. Richard, I don't know if you ever heard this story, but this is funny. Kenneth had just taken an exam. Remember you and the one you shared your room with, Andy. You had just taken exams, and all of a sudden you get a call from the dean's office.
I know this.
So he gets a call from the dean's office over the loudspeaker. Will Kenneth Koenig, Mr. Koenig, please come to the dean's office? And everybody's having a fit because they just got through taking an exam. And why is he calling him to the dean's office? So he gets down there. He finds the dean with one foot up on the desk and very casually sitting there. And he greets him, makes small talk, and then Kenneth's sitting there having a fit, you know. And finally, he says to Kenneth, my daughter is going to attend the U of A, and I want to know which dormitory she should sign up for. And I remember Kenneth telling me this story, and I thought that was one of the funniest stories I'd ever heard. So finally you get back there and everybody's waiting with bated breath, and you tell them the story. Of course, everybody cracks up. So that was funny.
Talk about your grandchildren and their
Okay.
mom, your
Okay.
relationship with their
Okay.
mom.
Okay. All right. Comes comes the revolution. Kenneth meets Ricarda, and Ricarda is a very beautiful girl.